much. Hi, everyone. Very glad that you found it worthwhile to stick around late on a Friday night. So congratulations and thank you. I think we have a fabulous panel today. I'm so excited to have been asked to present. Just a clarification, I did not go to undergrad for Yale. It was actually grad school, and it took me 2 tries to get in because the MBA program there is quite of a tough program. But again, very glad to be helping moderate this panel tonight. I think we've got some terrific panelists. I really want this to be an open discussion. I've got a list of questions that I framed before we met this evening to help each of our panelists really share about what they're doing in the realm of talent and workforce analytics. But we had some great discussion, in the keynote speech as well. So I really encourage you to ask questions as we're moving forward. In fact, I think what I'd like to do, just to get a better sense of who's in the audience, just by a show of hands, can I ask how many people would say that they are in the HR field or the HR industry? Show of hands. Okay, about 6 or 7. How many of you would put yourself in the analytics camp, the analytics industry? Okay, many more show of hands. One waving in the back, thank you. hardcore analytics. Anybody here from IT or technology? Okay, a lot of hands as well. Did anybody come in here because they were getting a tour of the building and didn't know it was going to be? Okay, great, thank you. That was a brilliant speech off the cuff. That was really fabulous. So terrific. Well, what I'd like to do is get started. What I'm going to ask each of the panelists to do is give us a quick introduction of your name and where you work. And my next question after this one is going to be going deep, a little bit deeper into how you do and how you got started in workforce analytics in your organization. But for now, just tell us who you are and how you got into this field. So David, you want to start?
Sure. I'm David Parker with Bank of America. I work in an organization called Salesforce Optimization. The biggest charge that we have is to turn our sales force into just that, a retail sales force. Most people think of personal bankers inside of a branch as just an order taker, and we're really trying to get them to probe into customers' needs more and to sell all the value that we have available at the bank. So,
great. Thank you. I'm David Dietrich. I work at EMC. I'm part of our global education area at the company, mostly focused on external education for our customers, partners, and also employees who take it. I head up a small data science team, and we basically do research and create education materials related to data mining, machine learning, and related topics using open source tools. So the genesis of this was really we started acquiring big data companies and realized that it's not just enough for people to buy massively parallel architecture databases. You also want to teach people what are the ways you can really get a lot of value out of these things. So that was kind of the early formation of me and my team, and we work on lots of research projects there, but also across the company as well.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Lisa Croto. I work at Fidelity Investments. Right now I'm in our Global Business Services group, but prior to this role I was in the finance organization, and as Greta mentioned, one of the largest expenses that we do have are employees, so that let me get involved in some really neat analytics and been involved with a lot of the different work that we've done, especially around people movement and then organizational redesign, and I look a lot at matrix organizations and how we interact across the company and across the global workforce. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Melissa Arante. I'm the Director of HR Analytics at Liberty Mutual Insurance. We're responsible for internal HR research, reporting and metrics, and business intelligence.
Terrific, thank you. So actually, Melissa, I'm going to ask you to start, and we'll come back this direction. I'm really interested to find out about how workforce analytics came to be within your organization. So what was the business need that made folks decide that this is something we need to do? How did you decide to stand up that function of their practice in your organization? How did you get leaders on board? Tell us a little bit about the evolution about how you came to do what you do.
Right, so our leaders were on board from the start. Our EVP of HR back then, Helen Sales, talking in 2005, was looking for someone to start HR research inside the HR department. And so it was really her vision. So she had hired me to start the research function. At the time, we had 2 people. We were responsible for the annual employee opinion survey and starting up basic research. So over time, we hired a couple of PhDs. And we worked on creating, the first model we created was the predictive model of turnover. We were predicting new hire turnover to help reduce our new hire attrition. And it's just grown from there as we get requests from clients, as we look to what's happening in the business, and how can we use workforce data to help solve business problems and then bring it to the business. It just continued to grow. So from that group of 3, we're now a group of 15, and our responsibilities spread and included the reporting and the business intelligence.
Okay. Lisa, can you answer the same question, please?
Sure. So my story is a little bit different. Coming from finance, my background's in modeling and looking at multi-year planning and things like that. So when opportunities came up for us to look at the workforce, that's how I got pulled into things. And I think some of the interesting things that I've been able to work on are not only looking at our employee populations, but also looking at how we interact with vendors, and especially in our IT workforce, we have different engagements with different people. So that's been really complex, and it's been interesting to pull things together, not only from a data perspective, but also how are we doing the work. And for me, not coming from HR, I've really learned a lot, and that's been interesting. But I guess to answer the question, how did workforce come about from the leadership? In my case, it's been more project-based. Every once in a while, I'll look at a group together that's been more tangible. For example, something I worked on was maybe a year-long organization that came together, and in the end, it really was a project. And I think we've now been able to bring the data sets together in a way that are standardized, and now people are leveraging them more. So we're starting to see areas pop up across the firm that are having actual names of workforce analytics and things like that. So it's exciting because I think if you had asked me this question a few years ago, I wouldn't have associated myself with it. I would have told you I love what I do and gone on and on and on. I wouldn't have had a name for it. So this is really exciting for me to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I've been involved in a lot of different things. Prior to education, I've done software product management, design. I've done, headed analytics and operations team. The role that I have now, we're really creating education materials for people, like I said, they're free and open source tools. So, I think back to the comment earlier about quoting the McKinsey numbers of 1.5 million people, and, these numbers everyone quotes. For me, I'm kind of seeing it a little up close, right? I'm seeing the people who are trying to become data scientists or trying to become heads of data science teams. So for me, I get to see kind of what sort of archetypical patterns emerge of the kinds of people trying to make these changes and grow, and what are the kinds of growth that they need to do based on where they're starting from. But the project that I was thinking of related to workforce analytics is a little different. I think back to Greta's presentation, a lot of what I read is about attrition modeling or predicting high performance. The project that comes to mind for me was part of a project team I was with where we were trying to measure and predict innovation within EMC. So innovation, I think, is one of these that's very squishy for a lot of people, right? Everyone talks about wanting to be innovative. Companies always say they want to be innovative. But to figure out what innovation is and who's doing it is a relatively tricky problem. So the way we approached it was really every year we have innovation contests where business units put up challenges and prize money to solve those challenges, and then people can submit ideas. So what we did is a friend of mine who's a data scientist looked at a lot of that data and created social graphs of the people submitting ideas. And they looked at what are the attributes related to the ideas that do best, and also what are the social interactions among the people submitting the ideas. So based on this, we could look at who are the hubs within those networks of innovation, who are the most innovative people, and what attributes do they share, right? And so to reward those people is very different than rewarding other people. And the reason I say that is because some of these people are in the inky shadows and want to stay there, right? So you have to find ways to reward them, but respect their interests and remain in that way in some ways. So it was quite an interesting project. So it was really a cross-functional project team that we did for that work.
So our executive team asked what should have been an easy question about 1.5 years ago. The question was, who are my best salespeople? And on the surface, it's an easy answer. You go right to the incentive plan. You find out who's funding at the highest levels. You pluck those people out, which is exactly what I did. And then I went to the executives that these people work for, our regional executives and then the area executive. And I just handed those names to them. And I got across the board answers where they would say, these aren't my best. These people over here are my best. And then I'd look at where they are on the curve, and they're somewhere in the middle, maybe slightly to the right of center. So it really started spurring much more interesting questions about, well, how are you defining the best? And it's not about home runs. Like anybody that likes baseball, you know, everybody loves the home run hitter because he can win the game when the bases are loaded with one swing. But it's about the balanced salesperson. And all of our programs, all of our measurements, we're looking at the big wins. And we're measuring who is good at those big wins. And as I started digging into the different areas of focus, at Bank of America, we're nationwide. So we have a lot of leaders managing associates, and they all had different variables that they were defining as successful. So we started gathering up all of these opinions on what makes it great to be a personal banker, and then started doing exactly what Greta was talking about, taking these variables and then looking at the outcomes, and not just the incentive plan, but other things like how active are you? Are you creating sales interactions? Are you interacting with our tellers? Are you helping other associates in the banking center win inside their incentive plans? And through all of that, started a new program called Salesforce Optimization, because we quickly learned that we don't know who our best are. And we not only need to define that, we need to figure out who is great, who is not great, and then start to tease out what are the characteristics that differentiate these groups of people. And then once you know that, you can coach to it, you can hire to it, and then you can look at who is actually attriting and make sure those folks that are leaving are not exhibiting those great characteristics that you want. So I would argue that attrition isn't always a bad thing, as long as it's the right attrition. So we also create programs at the bank where if you're not exhibiting these behaviors, we're going to try to push you along that continuum as well.
No, that's actually perfect link to what Greta was describing in terms of maybe the behaviors you thought were your successful behaviors are not, in fact, the ones you're looking for. We don't want you to be too friendly. We don't want you to be too chatty if you're working in a call center. You know, we love the enthusiasm, but stop talking. We need to get to the next call. So terrific. Well, that's a great segue, because I think Greta also set a great stage for the importance of any talent analytics that you do in your organization absolutely has to be connected to the business. And I will share, I do a lot of workforce planning and workforce analytics in government organizations. That's my specialty. I focus on the federal practice within Booz Allen. It's really easy for HR organizations and the analytics that they're doing inside to be buried deep in the organization. Even if they have fabulous insights, they're not getting connected enough to the mission or to the business. And therefore, they're not viewed as successful, within that organization. So my question to the panel is, can you give us any specific examples where the work that you have done has been directly related to the business? And do you have, for example, cost savings or other operational improvements that you can speak to that have resulted because of the analysis you've done and the insights you've been able to bring and the decisions that have resulted?
Do you want to mix it up?
Mix it up. Who would like to start first? We'll start from our, David's grabbed the mic, so he's passing it on to Lisa, so we'll go with Lisa.
So as I mentioned, I have a lot of experience in strategic planning and multi-year planning, so that was directly tied to different cost savings initiatives, and that's where we were able to work together. As I mentioned, I was on many cross-functional teams in past roles, so that's where this all came together, where we can look at something at a very high level. I would say I was coming at it more from the business side, so we get together and decide what are the levers that we need to look at to affect the change that we need to see in the organization over a certain time horizon. And it was really interesting to be in the room and hear the highest level decisions, figure out what are the priorities, how are we going to look at this, and again, this is all just tied back to business, so we have real goals that this is tied back to. But then from a data perspective, to then be able to go back, for me, when I'm just enjoying my day at my desk, go to the data set, tie this then back to the big picture, and then get into all the nitty gritty and then work with partners that I think really get at things that you were talking about, because I'm not as close to I think, what maybe someone's day-to-day work may be. And I love the data and can see what it's telling me, and as I look across, and can maybe tie it to something and measure it later on as like a KPI, a key performance indicator or something that might be more on the business side. I think when we're talking about the workforce, it's really, really important to think about the people aspect. And that's what I loved about the presentation we talked about earlier, because I think sometimes it can feel really cold when you're just looking at percentages or a number, or you're doing scenario planning, and it's really nice when you can bring a team together and then have the full picture, and I think that's when it works really, really well. And it's best for the organization and also for, I think, the outcomes and the people that are involved with different changes that end up happening.
Oh, it's a great question, but all the work we do is business related, or we wouldn't do it. Right? So, and the way we tie it to the business is either we look in, when we were first starting out and we were kind of trying to drum up business and people didn't quite understand what we were doing, we would look at the organization and see where do we see issues. We'd look at our reporting and see where there's high instances of turnover, or we'd see long times for selection, time to fill. And start approaching those leaders and say, it looks like you're having an issue here. Would you like us to look into it? And generally the answer is yes. And then we can do some analysis and come back to them with it. Another way we often start is we'll ask them about issues they're having in their business, and they, especially when you get to the line, the line business leaders with your HR partner, you'll hear them express quick research-related questions. They don't recognize it can be answered with data yet, but once you start hearing their questions, you realize it's easy to solve, or easy to get an answer for them. Maybe it might be hard to solve, but we can get an answer with data for them. And the other thing we do, and I think one of the strongest things we do, is when we hear from an HR business partner we're having an issue with turnover or selection, whatever it might be, we say, well, the first thing we need to do is talk to the managers and see what they think is going on. And so we hear the managers' ideas, why do you think people are turning over? Why do you think selection is difficult? Whatever it might be. And then we test their hypotheses, and it's so powerful for managers to have these ideas, but they're not sure where to invest their time and resources. Then we can test it for them and give the information back. So I often think of an example years ago when we were meeting with sales managers, and they were experiencing extremely high turnover. Since I know we're being taped, I'm not going to say how high that turnover was. And so we met with individual managers in all of the regions. And they all said, well, we're really not having that much of a problem with turnover. I've only lost, 3 or 4 people this year in their groups of 10 or 12, because you can't see it in your own group. But once you aggregate it across everyone, there's a significant turnover problem, but it was hard for them to see. But they had great theories on why it was happening, and we put it all together. We're able to create a model where we could predict the likelihood that someone would turn before they joined us based on their resume. So we're able to implement that. You asked about cost savings. In that particular example, working with the business to estimate the cost savings, in 9 months, they estimated $4 million of cost savings from not hiring people that would have cost us money to train and then turn over.
That's a great one. The ones I think of where I've had more concrete measurement of the outcomes, I think are more toward what you were saying, which is more in our sales analytics function, because I'm pretty close to people who do that. But I guess one point I would just add to what's been said is, Greta, your presentation, you talked about CRISP-DM, which I think is very good methodology. But one of the things that I think is critical in these kinds of projects is when you have those wins, you have to evangelize them, right? It's not just that you and your manager know you saved $4 million, right? You need to tell people, you need to show them how you did the project. At least for us, like the innovation project we did, our main stakeholder was our CTO. So for him, he was very excited about innovation. That's what drives him in that role. So we're also able to communicate that. We've helped coach other groups on how to improve innovation. So part of the ways we measure that is how many more patents are created based on that, how many more of those ideas go into new software products that get created, and what is the influence of people who are doing very innovative work across the company. The other thing we're able to do is look at pockets geographically and also by business unit of who is really driving that, and try to relate it to different kinds of training that was done on innovation, and also look at top-down support in those groups. And there was quite a lot of connection for doing that. So I guess the thing I would add is, measure it, but you have to communicate what those wins are too.
Understanding the business is critical. I actually spent half of my career at Bank of America behind the scenes as a data scientist who thought that I knew the business because I knew the numbers. But until you get out into the banking center and you stand behind the teller line and you've got 40 sets of eyes looking at you, wondering what you're doing there, why aren't you helping, it changes your perspective on just what it is that I'm measuring. When we first created throughput, for example, when we're looking at what good productivity looks like for a personal banker, we started out where productivity was productivity. If you were able to create one sale out of 1,000 customer transactions, that was good. And as you went up the transaction scale, you expected, a linear curve. You should do more sales the more people that you see. But unless you know the business, you need to understand that Boston is a much more affluent market than, say, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And the customer profiles are different. So those transactions in Boston are going to take longer because you're going to have a customer that might want to talk about a Merrill Edge or a Merrill Lynch investment. They might have a mortgage or a refinance they need to talk about. You might not have that same type of customer in Myrtle Beach. So really segmenting our population became important so that we could measure correctly. So that when I say your throughput is 2% or your yield is 2%, that's good for you. Your yield over here might be 8%, and I'm going to like you guys the same because you're in markets that are much different. I never would have thought that years ago until I got into the channel and started learning more about the business. And the only way I learned that was talking to our associates. That communication point that you made, Greta, is invaluable. Just ask the question, why is it that you're at 2%? Do you think that's good? And you'll start to hear the feedback that is critical to understanding the data points that we look at on the back end.
Oh, that's terrific. So, a related question about return on investment. We've talked about some of the analysis that you've done or the efforts that we've heard about that lead to a return on investment for the problem that you're studying. I'm curious to hear about the return on investment for each of you and your practices or your programs in your offices. What I'm really getting at here is, how do you make sure that your leaders and heads of the organization continue to see value in the work that you do, and what are the metrics by which your work is measured? So, and Melissa, I know you said you started with a 3-person team and now you're up to 15. Obviously, you're doing work that is generating insights that are important for the business. You're demonstrating that through some return on investment. Curious to hear about the metrics by which all of you and your offices are measured internally within your organizations.
So
you'll start. Okay,
we keep it very simple because we're bankers and we like to have everything be nice and clean. So there's 3 groups of people now after we've defined what good looks like. You're either red, you're yellow, or you're green. So throughout the entire franchise, we know what percent of our bankers are green, yellow, and red. We started out, once we first created this measurement, at 6% green. And this last month that we've reported it, we've moved that up to 24% green. And we want to continue that trajectory upwards to around 50%. We understand there's going to be a ceiling where you're never going to have 100% green, or the measurement's probably wrong. But we're clearly moving that curve, and we're doing it by coaching to the behaviors that we've understood that make a better banker, and through attrition, intelligent attrition for bankers that just aren't going to make the cut.
How do others evaluate yourselves in terms of your metrics or your ROI?
ROI. So I guess
it's late on a Friday.
Luckily, it's just water. They're certainly
they
don't. At least, I guess I'll give a couple examples. In the innovation work that we did, I mean, that was really more like a kind of crowdsourced team. It's people who are volunteering to help out on this. So costs were very low. We have the advantage of having acquired some big data companies, so we have a lot of technologies that we could use right off the bat. And we used free and open source tools to do that. So for us, it was about figuring out who is really driving value. I mean, EMC is very much a technology engineering-driven company, so figuring out who's creating more new IP is a really big deal, and figuring out how to replicate that is really important. My personal team right now is a little different. My team, we're measured on, how are we creating things that people want to buy relative to learning about data science and about big data. That has taken off in a way that I think people didn't expect in the education area, right? I think they probably didn't quite realize what they're getting into when they tried to build a team. But that's been very successful. But I think that's very traditionally measured. It's volume, it's dollars, it's those things. But I think the other side effect is we get drawn into conversations that we wouldn't have been drawn into in the past. So instead of creating improvements to our education software engines, we're able to do things like, create sense users and then recommend things on the fly. So we can determine what they might like, what kind of content they might like, and do things that are much more robust than we used to do.
I would say how the team that I've worked with in the past, and I would measure our success, are people using the system that we created. So as I mentioned, I was on a cross-functional team. We were able to bring together about 8 different data sets and standardize them, and then create a capability that allows everyone in our firm to look at our employee data. So again, I mentioned not only just people that work at Fidelity, but also we have different engagements with different types of people, and it's kind of complicated. So we were able to standardize that, bring it all together into one place, and then also standardize the way that people are looking at matrix relationships. So we have a fairly complex workforce, and while we have really good record-keeping systems, they're not all in one place. So I spent the better part of the last year or so working with the team, and it was a really interesting experience for me too, because while I've worked with technologists, I never had the experience to the level of creating business rules and doing the business requirements document and really explaining things that I had been doing in my past roles to then scale into a way that other people could use. So this past July, we went live with a standard system that now is available to everyone at the firm to use, and I think we measure success by how many phone calls we get for people wanting to use the tool or asking questions about the tool, and different ways that they're actually using the data, because in the past, we didn't have this available to us at all, or it'd be one person just pulling together data and then pushing it out to people. Now we have a system where people can go pull the information, and it's really interesting if you're not, because if you haven't had the depth of experience to use something, the new ways that people are looking at things, or the next steps that they're looking for in it, because they say, well, great, it meets my need to this percentage, but these are the next things my organization is looking to do, and it's really that next level of analytics. So I think, again, I just say the more people we have using a standard is success, and then what they're thinking once they're using the standard is bringing us to another level, and it's really exciting.
I think it's easy to make the case for our team, because if they didn't have us, they'd have to pay consultants for the studies, and you know how much consultants cost. And so just doing a few studies a year more than pays for our entire group. But the way we measure ourselves is we conduct customer satisfaction surveys of our clients and ask them how we're performing. And we ask them if they use the data that we provide and the analysis we provide, especially for managers in their day-to-day work. And we continue to try and improve that. We get some pretty good usage, different areas, it's more usage than others. But those are our simple metrics, and it gives us a good measure.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of organizations are smart about getting feedback from your customers just like that, so that you're not producing necessarily kind of the same reports, the same analysis, same statistics, but always updating it to make sure that you're staying relevant. So on that question, I'm going to ask you to indulge your inner geek, and I'd like you to tell me about kind of the cool stuff you're working on today. So these can either be analytic approaches that you're taking that you haven't tried before within your teams, or connections that you've been able to make looking at different sets of data that have resulted in insights you never thought you would have been able to get to years ago or months ago when you were first getting started. What's the, if someone says, what's cool about your job, how would you answer that today?
Everything's cool about our
Awesome.
job. So people are always looking for what's new and cool, and I think basic good research design of practical questions that help managers make better decisions in their day-to-day work has the most impact. And it might not sound cool initially, but managers are so excited to have some basic knowledge about things like, are rehires better than new hires? In our population, a huge proportion of our new hires are rehires. And are they good? Should we be doing that? right? How about employee referrals? Another huge proportion of the sources of hires are referrals. And managers need to know if these are good or not good, and why they're not good if they're not good, and what they can do about it. So we publish, this is what I think is cool. Every month we put out a new, what we call an HR Insight. We publish it through a tool that goes to every manager's desktop, and it's a one-page summary of research that we've done, and we tell the manager what's the key question, the data we use to answer it, and what's the action that they can take. So a really practical application of our research for a manager to use on a day-to-day basis.
So mine's more of a time measurement. A few years ago, I was working on an exercise and looking at an organization and across various dimensions, and I don't even know how many hours and months actually I spent with various other people trying to get to these particular views, and testing the data and getting these manual files in, and we're pulling it, we're learning a lot. So it was actually very valuable work, because as you go through something painful, you learn quite a bit and you come up with best practices and so on. So I had to do the same thing actually just last Friday. It's a very kind of near-term example, and it took me 2 hours to do something that literally took a couple months across many people, 3 years ago. So we're kind of looking at the same things again, and I think that's where you look at, well, is this repeatable? Well, yes, but do we want to spend that much time doing it? And I think that's where the incentive came to do some of the work I was describing earlier from a systems perspective, is that need was there, and we finally had a sponsor where things just came together to get the right people together, and it's definitely paying dividends to be able to do other work that day. So it was exciting.
Lots of other work.
Yeah.
I guess for me, what's exciting is being on top of the big data space and data science space is very exciting, because it's changing so rapidly that for me, I get to learn lots of new things all the time. I get very excited about that. I get the chance to write patents with people who are on my team, which I enjoy doing, inventing new things. When I go back to this project I mentioned, there's a colleague of mine who, tongue-in-cheek, says that PowerPoint is where ideas go to die. So he basically says, you could do a great project, and if it winds up on a slide, and that's as far as it goes, it's kind of dead, right? So the real idea behind that is, if you're going to make it work, you either have to use it to drive decisions, or you have to integrate it into a system, right? So it's systemic. And with the innovation project I mentioned, what we did is we took it from a standalone project to building tools that on the fly would evaluate ideas people would submit. So if you're going to submit a new idea for process improvement or for analyzing language, it would basically analyze the ideas you're submitting and tell you other people who may be experts in that space that you should talk to. Or it might tell you, here's 2 other ideas like that in the last 3 years. Go read them first. So basically tell you ways to make your ideas better very rapidly as you're developing them, right? And that's something that I haven't really come across. So that was a very interesting project to do, and one that's more like a living project, right? It wasn't a PowerPoint and then it's filed away. Right. It's something that continues to improve what people are doing.
Right. And if I may, because before I jump to you, David, I had a really funny example and a powerful one where an HR director was presenting to the executive board, and instead of walking in the door with a PowerPoint presentation, he took he had everything created as infographics, and he made a placemat, so a plastic placemat that had infographics on the top and the back. And so all the executives walked into the board meeting, and there was just a placemat at everybody's table, and they sat down, and they immediately picked it up and started bending it and flipping it over and looking at it, and that was the whole discussion. That was an hour discussion, and they got the point. There was no PowerPoint, there was no presentation, no speech, just a plastic, rubber placemat with all the information on it, and it was incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
So thank you. David, how about you?
Sure.
What's the cool stuff?
So we got 2 cool things that I'll talk about. One, everybody in this room is probably already doing, and we just might be slow to take. So now that we know who's good and who's not, we're sending behavioral scientists out into banking centers, looking at these characteristics. And when we're starting to feed that information into our hiring practice so that we can have more predictive hires that are going to stay with us longer, ramp up shorter, and get to a better production level. So that one is probably the most useful thing that we're doing. Another one's kind of big brother-ish. which is squirmy in a little bit. So we have all these measures. We're measuring behaviors. We know who's doing them and we know who's not. So we feed this information into systems, our systems integration, where the managers that go out to talk to the banking center managers and the personal bankers, we're going to tell them what to look for. And then we're also going to ask them to document what action plans that you're doing with the personal bankers to get them ramped up to a good productivity level. And then we're going to inspect that system to ensure A, they're making the visits, and B, are you inspecting these things that we know are going to move the personal banker up the productivity curve. So again, I can't agree more. You have to integrate the systems. If I just feed the manager information and rely on them to interpret it and take action on it, you're going to have varying degrees of success. You'll have some that really adopt it because there's some number geeks out there that love it, but others are going to see another report along with the 10 other that were sent to them, toss it aside, and go about their day like they normally would. So we're going to force the issue to make sure that things are happening in the manner that we want them to happen.
So 6 months' time, you'll have some new ideas on what's working or not?
It's got to be quicker than 6 months.
Okay, 3 months?
Yes.
Okay. So I've got 2 more questions to ask before we want to make sure folks in the audience have a chance to ask questions. But kind of on the flip side, we've talked about things that you would deem kind of your cool stuff that's going on today. My next question is really around challenges that you've faced in your jobs. And what I'm getting at are difficulties getting to the data that you thought you needed to do the analysis you wanted to do, difficulties getting to the customers that you were trying to support with getting them to read your analysis or sort of act on the results. What are some of the challenges that you faced trying to do workforce analytics in your organizations, and how have you tried to address them?
Gaining agreement on what's important. So we have
from whom?
From the managers.
Okay.
So when we define the measures that identify the good behaviors and the bad behaviors, when you ask the questions about what it is that defines success across a network of 5,500 banking centers and then all the managers that support that, you get answers completely across the spectrum. And when you omit measures that some people think are important, they tend to discount the end result. So once you come up with the minimum number of KPI, it's important to get everybody rallying around that, even if their measure didn't make the cut. So gaining the right adoption, and it starts at the executive level and it needs to push down. If you have the right amount of support from your leaders, people will adopt it. And then the other part to break through those barriers is to just publish the results. Everybody loves a good stack rank. Now, if you're in the middle or if you're at the bottom,
A little peer pressure.
That's right. That's right. Nothing motivates a person more than being on the bottom of a list. So we do that. We put it out there, and it creates a reaction. And that reaction is what I look for personally, because I know people will take action.
Especially if you used to be on the business side, you know exactly how those things are read.
That's
so
right.
You don't want to be there. Got
That's
it.
right.
Okay. Others, what other challenges have you had to work through?
So I guess that's the one I hear, which is sunlight is the best disinfectant. You know, you just make it invisible.
That's right, shining light on it.
So I think that is certainly a powerful one. To me, I think of 2 big challenges. One it kind of goes back to the stakeholdering and consensus you were talking about. I think that's a huge thing. That's a huge thing, right? So the way I think that challenge manifests itself is first, there can be a huge amount of challenge just getting your hands on the data you need, right? First of all, is it available? If it is available, can you get access to it? Sometimes that takes a very long time. Doing the actual analysis is a very short time, right? So getting consensus on that, getting the right stakeholders on that can take a long time. The second is at the other end of the process where, sometimes you might do a great analysis, but in so doing, you're uncovering unexpected insights. And the reality is, as was said earlier, we're people, right? So that means we have our unique set of experiences, our unique set of biases, all kinds of things, and our own set of operating assumptions when we do our work. Which means if you show someone something unexpected that may challenge their operating assumptions or may challenge their authority, there's going to be resistance. So I think that's the other big challenge, is finding ways to overcome that resistance sort of see a new way of doing things, because sometimes the data will tell people things maybe they don't want to hear. Sometimes I've done these projects and I've been told, maybe you should look at it this other way, right? So to imply there's a right answer and it's not the one you're showing.
You haven't found
What
it.
methodology did you use?
Right.
And it's
If you
flawed.
just keep
Yes.
torturing the data, I'll get the answer, like kind of thing. So I think it's first in the upfront stakeholder in getting access, and then at the end the sharing all the news, not just the good news part, which can be very challenging.
So I have two challenges that kind of came to mind when you asked the question, and I think the learnings that I've had from them are things that I try to start with now. So the first thing is actually definitions and communication. I think as much as we want to dive into the data, I think it's really important to make sure everyone's talking about the same thing and to document it. That's a big part of what I'm doing right now in my new role, because what means one thing to one organization doesn't mean the same thing, or there might be a slight nuance to it, and then all of a sudden you get down the path of analysis and the outcome isn't what you expect and you're back to the drawing board. So to kind of set that up front, and can't stress the documentation enough, because you can think you've had the conversation and then it isn't clear, people forget things, so it's nice to write it down. And the second thing, kind of related to that actually, is being really clear about what your starting point is and your baseline, because I think that's another place where the definitions and assumptions can be different for people. And when you're looking forward and trying to predict things or plan for things, if everyone's starting in a little bit different place, the outcome may be different. Or when you go to measure it again, it gets back to that: is it repeatable? Or when we go back to something, the ROI and things like that, just really focus on, is the starting point consistent? And if it isn't, that might be okay, but to really understand why it isn't, and then how things should be measured differently when you start to look for outcomes.
There's so many challenges. It's hard to pick my favorite.
Top three.
But I think I can certainly pick a favorite, and I think that really is getting people to take action based on the results. So that's one of the reasons for those HR insights, because if you can hit all the managers with insights, you have a better shot at the uptake than just hitting a portion of them. And we have some people are frequent customers, and they do a lot of work with us, and they do take action on what we do, and other people, well, could you cut it another way? Should we update the data? They'll come up with so many ways to delay without actually taking action, trying to understand why are they not taking action and what can we do to help them get to action.
So last question, and this is a nice jump off to this, and in fact I think several of you have alluded to some of your tips and tricks if you would, but my last question before we'll take questions from the group is, there may be many folks in the audience who are working to do workforce analytics, do talent analytics better in their organizations. Based on your experience, what's the one major piece of advice you would give to them?
So for me in HR analytics, I keep seeing this idea of this curve that you start with, descriptive data and you work way up to predictive analytics. And I would suggest that that's not a great idea. And I think Greta and I agree on this. And I think the key way to prevent yourself from thinking you have to start with this descriptive and get everything right until you get to predictive is to have two separate groups. One does reporting and one does research. And the researchers never do reporting. Because once they start doing reporting, that's all they ever do. Because reporting will never end. There's just a ridiculous volume of reporting, and that you just, so we have a whole team of people, and that's all they do every day, all day long. And then we have researchers who have quiet time to spend figuring out models and thinking and answering good questions, and they have to stay separate, in my opinion. I don't feel strongly about that at all.
That's brilliant. Can I give that advice to my clients, please? Thank you.
I think I might be tagging on to what you said just a little bit about the research. I wouldn't have described it that way, but I love the framework. So I guess whenever I start something, or what I've found is the Zen approach to data, to become one with the data. I'm sure a lot of you do that already, but to just sit with it. I think the research is probably more appropriate, but just to understand what you're working with before you get started too far. And I think the other thing that's been a recurring thing that I've noticed is that things don't need to be 100% accurate all the time. You don't need that full, complete data set, and I think that's why it's really important to understand what you do have and don't let what you can't do get in the way of what you can do, and focus on those things, because I think that's when you have a really strong business case to go out and look for the certain information that you do need, and you can really, I think, then champion things to create next steps.
I would say there's a lot of these projects, there's a tendency to leap in and start doing the analytics, right? And usually teams are not at a point where they can do that, even though they may have pressure to do that. right? So I would say the big thing that I see teams kind of skipping is sort of the upfront stages, or trying to do that too quickly to show fast results. So I would say, really almost over-communicate and really super understand the context at the very beginning as to why are you doing the project in the first place, what are the success and failure criteria of doing it, right? Failure criteria I think is important too, because you can spend a huge amount of time on a project, but you have to know when to stop. When have you gone far enough that you know you've reasonably tried enough and it's time to stop or adjust. And then I guess the second would be to not underestimate the time that's required to really condition data, right? To me, that's a huge time investment, and everyone gets excited about the analytics. I get excited about the analytics, but compared to preparing the data and conditioning it, it's like this much time in the span of a week, right? So I would say just keep that in mind when you map out projects.
To me, knowing the process that you're measuring is the most important aspect of analysis. And what that helps you do is understand the context. So when you have a number, you know right away whether that number makes sense or not. Because nothing will hurt your credibility more than going to an executive with a number that does not make sense as it relates to the business. Also, knowing the process gives you credibility with the people that you're measuring. That's why I like to be in the banking centers a lot. They see my face, they know that I'm not in it to tell on you, I'm in it to understand you better and to understand what makes you tick and how I can translate that to others that might be struggling. So just knowing that process to me is the most important aspect of analysis and measurement.
And the credibility is key, so that your leaders of the organization will take what you have to say and hopefully improve the business. So what questions do we have? We've got about 5 minutes. I know we're pushing things late on the schedule, folks, but we've done all the talking. Question, here you go.
You folks have talked about both hiring to a goal and coaching, training to a goal. And I'm curious what kind of measurements and experience you have in terms of the success of those two different approaches. I mean, in fact, have you found that it is successful to coach towards a goal?
So we have moved the needle on the coaching aspect. So I mentioned how our green percentage of personal bankers has increased significantly over the past year. And it's about the pressure. It's about identifying who needs the training or who needs the coaching and making sure they get it. Oftentimes it's ignored. We'll identify who's the red and then hope that somebody does something about it. Now we're actually making sure somebody's doing something about it, and that is truly moving the needle. So I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in on that. I'll answer all the questions.
Other questions in the back?
Yeah, so to look at your comment about PowerPoint, I've seen in my company, the company that I work at, where a lot of these new data analytics projects will come out, and they come out with a lot of fanfare, but 2-3 years later, when there's not that exact response to pushing this data to be reported, it seems like the whole effort kind of dies out. So what are some strategies you guys have seen that have worked to make sure that once you create this practice, that it's being implemented by the business, not just in the near year to year and a half, but over the long term?
Yep. So certainly having a sponsor is important, but like you said, that can change. People leave, what have you. I think it's really about two things. One, building it into a process. So it's not contingent on a person staying or leaving, right? It becomes part of the business, becomes part of the process. Second thing is that you're finding ways to show the value all the time, right? It's not just I did a great thing 2.5 years ago, right? Every month, they know you're saving the company money or you're making the money or you're doing something to make them more effective and you're communicating that. Those are the things I think help give it longevity, not just a sponsor leaving or staying, right? So I think those are kind of the big things to me. What do you think? You have practice like this too?
I think it has to be aligned with the business goals. I don't think it's always bad if an analysis, falls by the wayside because maybe we've gotten what we needed out of it, or maybe it's no longer aligned with our goals. I mean, we need to continually look at what are we analyzing, what reports are we providing, and do they meet, the strategy and the objectives we're trying to achieve.
Other questions? Over here?
Just one or two of you, but you threw out a lot of examples that I really liked about driving people to action and actually getting people to do something about the information that you're providing them. I think one of the challenges I'm finding in how do we get the analytics to the 99% is, we're taking something that's built like a jet airliner and asking it to be as drivable as a motor scooter, right? And for the regular manager out there to log in, have a dashboard of what's going on their screen or something. And so I'm wondering if you have some tips on things that you're doing to get the average manager to take action with something that could be kind of complicated in the background.
I think what we try to do is try to make it as simple as we can. So we don't show a lot of numbers. We certainly don't show statistics. We provide it in the appendix if anyone wants to read it, but we don't talk about any of that. I know the first time I presented something, I had regression coefficients and all kinds of things in it, and I quickly learned that that was not the way to win anyone over. So I only ever had one presentation like that. But we pick a few key metrics that are aligned with whatever our objectives are, and that's what we show. Maybe it's only 3 or 4 metrics. It's small. I mean, they've got a million other things to focus on, especially when you think about HR, and that might not be the first thing they're working on. They're focused on claims or underwriting or sales. So from a complicated analysis, we might pick up 3 or 4 key metrics, and that's what we show. And we keep showing them. And we suggest actions to take based on those findings, and we start by showing what is the question we're trying to answer. Here's the data that we provided. Here's the action you should take. We found some success with that.
If I may, I'll add something from my own experience as well. I think it's sometimes letting, in my case, doing management consulting, it's letting the client know that maybe they don't need the jet engine now and the scooter will be just fine. So it's managing their expectations because they'll see the level 5 analysis and assume that that's what they have to have in order to get to the answer. And they don't have the capability, they don't have the data, they don't have the time, they don't have the support. Sometimes, if you're starting from scratch, a simple descriptive statistic, it's a good place to start, right? So just managing sometimes the expectations that it doesn't have to be complex in order to be useful sometimes.
Right.
Others?
Yeah, I'd say showing them the why is what I always say, and that keeps it simple. So if I need to talk to a banking center manager, if I tell them why it's important to look at this certain measurement, I'll talk to it in reference to the process that they understand. So again, going back, if you know the process and you can communicate why this is important to you, it helps the adoption at the levels where they might not have as deep an understanding as you do with the data. But keep it simple. Don't measure 8 things like a big steak in front of you. You're not going to eat it all in one bite. Take a little bite at a time.
Start with a hamburger. So, one last question. Any questions from the group? Okay, well, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for making their time available.